But, you know, it's interesting for me because music is my comfort zone, right? Like, when I sing or speak, I like to have music underneath, even as Anders. No pressure. But lately, I don't know why, but God has been opening up opportunities for me to speak, and I feel very inadequate at times, and I feel like, wow, you know, I don't really have it all figured out. And so when I was asked to share a little bit about my story and the messages that have shaped me as a woman, I thought, what am I gonna share? I don't have a lot of time. I wanna focus on singing and not bore you all with speaking. But I thought even in that moment, where is that coming from? Where's that defeating kind of self-talk? Because we immediately go to that place when we start to step into something that's a little uncomfortable and step out of our comfort zone. And it kind of made sense in that moment to go back in time, little Sharon. And I'll just share a little bit about my background. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My dad is a musician and grew up, you know, as a jazz musician daughter. He played with Miles Davis for many years. You guys probably don't know who that is. But he's an amazing, amazing jazz musician. My dad is like a wizard. Growing up, I really thought he was. I didn't think he was human. I still think he's a little invincible. And my mom, she grew up singing in church. She's opposite of my dad. And they were great friends at the beginning, and at a certain point, the marriage ended. And I don't remember a lot about that time, but I do remember the feelings that I felt. And I couldn't put it into words, and I started developing almost like asthma, but it wasn't asthma because they couldn't diagnose it as asthma. But I would get anxiety and couldn't breathe, couldn't catch my breath, and it was around that time. And again, I'm just digging deep into my story when, again, with this theme, it kind of pushed me to dig a little deeper. So then we moved in with my grandmother, who helped raise me. And she has gone on to be with the Lord. She passed at 94, but she was like my second mom. And I remember when we moved in with her, she lived in this old home. It was like throwback vintage carpet, stained glass windows. It was just a little like blast from the past. And when you're that young, it's kind of like intimidating when you move into a big home. And it was the family home. And music was my escape during that time. And I don't know if I would have made it without music. And kind of like this melody is sort of, you know, carrying me through this. Music has sort of carried me through a lot of painful transitional moments in my life. And there's a quote by one of my favorite poets, Maya Angelou, and she just talks about how she would curl up in the notes and, you know, just kind of just squeeze up in between the notes and hide. And for me, that was what music was. Like, I would hide, I would write songs, I would make believe and just come up with all these different, almost like personas. You know, one day I was Whitney, the other day, one day I was Whitney, one day I would be Mariah Carey, and I would dream of, you know, what would it be like to sing on a stage? But I was always very, very shy and didn't really feel comfortable, you know, just naturally. But it was always my outlet. And it wasn't until I turned 18 that I realized that this isn't just for me. Like, I'm not supposed to just write songs in my room and keep this to myself. I'm not supposed to just sing to some make-believe audience. And it was the point at which I realized that my music has a purpose. And unfortunately, what led me to that place was losing a friend to gun violence in the city of Chicago. And he was a young man and on his way to do great things. And I remember this just feeling like this is not right. Like, he's not supposed to die. And that was years ago. I won't say how many, but I just remember feeling like there's got to be more to life than this. And how can I, as an artist, speak to some of these things that are going on in my community, the violence, the poverty, just the different things that were oppressing. And I began to think about how music can be a form of resistance. And music isn't just about entertaining, it's about shifting atmospheres and changing the world and inspiring people to something better. But as we talk about like messages and those words and those things that shape you, just like there are positive messages from my father and my mother to go out and sing and do your thing, I began to get hit almost like bullets with negative messages. Messages like, you'll never survive as an artist, you're not gonna make it in that lane. I remember my first job, I kind of shared my dreams of doing music, and I was told that I wouldn't be able to sustain, especially doing music in the church and in ministry. And it is hard, it's difficult. In fact, I left my job about 3-4 years ago to pursue my solo music and my artistry full time. And it has been a grind, and it gets lonely. And I don't have like this big machine behind me, right? Like I'm not on a big label. I don't even have a manager right now. But God has provided so much opportunity to the point where I'm like, how are people finding me? And you might be feeling kind of small in your, what seems like your corner of the world. And I'm just here to testify that what God has for you is for you, and that even if people, naysayers and doubters and people that may think, well, because you grew up here, you can't do that. I remember even receiving messages, but because your hair is, I wanted straighter hair because I thought that I had to have straight hair to sing. And I know it sounds ridiculous, and it sounds ridiculous coming out of my mouth, but I wanted lighter skin. I wanted these things that I thought defined beauty. And I get emotional not because I believe those things anymore. I know those things aren't true, but just thinking about how far God has brought me in my journey and embracing me and the wow and all of it, and I think one moment that really affirmed and silenced every single voice that has tried to come up against the call that God has on my life was when I was able to stand before people on national television and do America's Got Talent, a show that I had watched previously and thought was rigged. I'm like, normal people don't end up on The Voice or America's Got Talent or whatever. These shows are rigged, and here I am, a girl from the south side of Chicago on this stage, and felt really out of my league, but also felt like, wow, like, it's true, that when you have a call and a passion in your heart, it doesn't matter what anybody throws at you. And so in that moment, I remember being on stage, and Mel B, I don't know how many of you know who that is, but Spice Girls was like, oh my gosh, what? So that's cool, because I was like, it was a little while ago, but that was my era. Like, they don't really do girl groups as much anymore, I don't think. And so she was like, I looked up to her, like I wanted to be Mel B, right? And so I'm standing on stage, and I'm nervous, and I start to sing, and then I'm done, and I'm already, again, those messages, you didn't know that. Like, those messages start to creep in, and she looks up at me and she's like, I'm gonna do something I've never done, and she hits the golden buzzer. And I didn't, at that moment, like, I just kind of went blank and didn't really, they tell you backstage, like, here's, what happens when you go out there. One of the judges could hit a buzzer, but it's unlikely. They only get one per season. So if you get the golden buzzer, like, that's a big thing. And she ran up stage and hugged me, and she's like, I feel like you're just now finding your voice in this moment. And in some ways, she was right. But it's been a journey, and one of my mottos as an artist is to be a voice with and for the voiceless. And I find that to be interesting for me because I've struggled with using my voice. So how is it that something that I'm called to do and help others with, I have struggled to do? And I'm realizing that a lot of it's often like that. Like, whatever your thing is usually linked to your pain or to something, because how can I tell people about something I've never experienced? Like, how can I talk about finding my voice when I just came out the womb confident and ready to take on the world? Like, no, I've had to push through so many messages, so many just from whether it be society or my peers or what the news headlines are telling me. And I think right now there's a lot of headlines telling us what we are as a world, but we are light bearers, we are hope bearers, and I just come to speak life over you and peace and love and the things that are true about you and the things that are true about me. And I think it's a good segue into this song that I wrote called Sweet Darling. And this song, I always get a little emotional when I sing it because it's about finding your voice and it's about breaking free. In this case, I love to write songs about real stuff. I lead worship in churches. And I also write songs about what it means to be human because I believe it all points to God. And sometimes we need to hear more of that in church, is real stories, stuff that we go through as women and girls. And so this was inspired by a relationship that I kind of lost my voice in, and just the abuse that was experienced, but how we can break free from that. And so Sweet Darling really could be anybody. It could be, the little girl inside of you or the woman in your life who you know is just sweet and like tender, but has been bruised. And I just want to encourage her to just stay soft and don't let the world make you hard and make you shut down. Yeah.